everybody to Our Stories program at Local Weaving. Thank you all for coming. This is a wonderful turnout. I believe this is the most highly attended workshop we have done so far. So let's give Frances a round of applause.
Almost all my friends.
More than there is wonderful. And I'm not surprised.
I've heard some of my stories, but maybe not all of them.
And just to give you a quick snippet of what this program is we have established it to not only celebrate Appalachian culture, but especially the Gatlinburg community, but also how the library serves it. So in this case, weaving, and the ladies that have created it. So we are very, very excited about it. So Frances Fox Shambaugh and Jess Cox will be our guests for this evening. So no further ado, welcome.
Okay, well, we're going to start out. I'm going to do first tell you a little bit of my background, and then I'm going to do a little bit of history of the weaving here, which is primarily about the Pi Beta Phi settlement school. And then Jess is going to tell about what we're doing, and then we'll have questions, show and tell, whatever. We just be very casual. So I'll get started. I grew up in Gatlinburg. We moved back here. My parents were both from here. All my ancestors are from here. My husband once wanted to know if I was descended from Martha Jane Husky Ogle, and I said, don't go there. He got on the computer and he came back and said, did you know out of your 8 great-grandparents on your mother's side, 5 of them are descended from. I said, I told you not to go there. But it was from about, she had 7 children maybe, and they were adults when she came here, when they moved here. So she's the first lady to settle in Gatlinburg, what is now Gatlinburg. So, both my grandmothers were weavers, but I never saw them weaving. But I was around weaving growing up here. I went to the Pi Beta Phi settlement school. We moved back here when I was 8 years old, and my dad bought an island in the middle of town, which is now Margaritaville. It had 21 little cabins on it, all the way around, and a dirt road around it, and it was a tourist court. And the houses were all 1 and 2 bedrooms, and they had kitchens then, and there was a wall all the way around, not high enough, by the way, but and steps down to the river. And so my mother had twins when I was 5 years old, and I was sort of spoiled. I was the oldest, and they ran around with all sorts of young couples, and nobody else had any children, so I had lots of parents and people to spoil me. So when mother had twins, you'd think, it would bother me, but she told me that I couldn't make up my mind if I wanted a brother or sister, so she just got me one of each. So I thought they belonged to me. I couldn't get jealous of them. But when we moved in and I was 8, they were just 3, so they kept her pretty busy, and there were 2 maids helping clean. So I was sort of all to myself in this wonderful, with trees in the middle of the island, and it's about 3.5 acres. You don't realize it's that large. And so I wrote nature poetry, and I played in the river, and I dammed it up and made a swimming hole, and I was just all by myself having fun there. But then I went across the street and to the Pi Beta Phi settlement school. And of course the nurse was just across the street. That's where the health center was then. And so if I had a sore throat, I would just stop and Miss Chalmers would paint my throat. And I never got sick the whole time I was there. But when I was 13, I got my first job because they hired me they had a summer workshop. Every summer, they would have 6 weeks of arts and crafts classes. And this was in 1953. And that was when they built what is the staff house there, where the dining room and everything is. So you could get a job in town and make money if you were 14. So that's why they had to hire 13-year-olds to wash dishes in the dining room. So my first job was washing dishes for the Arts and Crafts School that evolved into Arrowmont School of Arts and Crafts. So this is what Gatlinburg looked like in 1912 when they when the Pi Beta Phi fraternity came here and started the little settlement school. And there were 6 houses and 2 stores. And a lady came, the Pi Beta Phi fraternity was the first women's sorority. So it was 50 years old in 1910 when they had their convention and decided they wanted to honor their founders by starting a settlement school in Appalachia where everybody was poor. And they discover us about every 75 years. We're still here and we still have needs. So the president came to Gatlinburg. She checked a bunch of places out. She came here to see if this was a good place. They looked at Wires Valley. They looked at some places in Kentucky. And but she came here and discovered that Gatlinburg was so isolated from the county seat, and that it was just and up every watershed, up Baskins, up Roaring Fork, down at Banner, all these places, there were farms. These were all, it was a barter economy, and the farms were spread out. So the local school system, there was a local school system, and I think this is the road to Sugarland. So if you want to know what the roads were like, that is the road to Sugarland. Okay, this is a subscription school. During about the time of the Civil War, there was no school system in the county. It was a county then, anyway. And so they would build a little building like this, and about 5 families would go together and hire a teacher. So, but by 1910, they had one-room schoolhouses, but they were about 2 miles apart. There was one at Banner, there was one in Gatlinburg, and Banner was, let's see, it's right after the tunnel, the spur. That's where Banner was. So there was one there was one in, this is the one that was at the corner of what is now Baskins and Parkway. So there'd be one-room schoolhouses about every 2 miles because that's about as far as the kids could walk to school. And of course they didn't have time to come and take them to school. So all over Sevier County, about every 2 miles, there was a one-room schoolhouse. But it only went to the 5th grade. And the teacher only went to the 5th grade. I mean, you couldn't find that many qualified teachers, so they would go through that, and whoever was the best student would turn around and be the teacher. So that's sort of how the system was. And like I said, it was a barter economy. So she found out that even though Gatlinburg, it was so far from the county seat, but that because of all the families, they could impact almost 250 families if they. So that was the reason she chose Gatlinburg to start the settlement school. And of course, in 1910, women couldn't be CEOs and doctors and senators and all of that. So most of the affluent, you see, they had 50 years of graduates in this sorority. They had alumni clubs all over the country, maybe 50, one in each, at least one in each state, but almost one wherever there was a university. So they had alumni clubs all over the state even 50 years later because they started, like I said, in the 1860. So they were 50 years old. And so they were affluent, educated women, savvy. They knew how to do a lot of things. So they immediately took over. They worked through the school system. They took over this one-room schoolhouse. But when they came here, they told them the community, the ones that could gather together, that they wanted to start a school here for better higher education for their children. And they wanted to accept, for one thing, they were really concerned about. They wanted to know what kind of religion Pi Beta Phi was. So when they found out it was non-denominational, they really didn't want a mission school here. They didn't want someone else teaching their children religion. So they were very happy about that. So it was all worked out. So they immediately took over the school system, and the county gave them the same amount of money that they would give the same number of students of all the schools. So the first class started out with 13 students, had 33 by the end of the year. Well, the second, and that was in 1912. In 1913, they had 45 students, so they wouldn't fit in that little building. So there was an abandoned Methodist church that they had for the second year. And that summer, the summer of 1913, they had told them when they met that they wanted them to help buy a campus for the school. And they was all agreed about that, but said they didn't know how to form a committee and do anything. So the lady came, the president at the time came to town and said, well, we're out of here. If you're not going to help us buy this land, we've got $600 to put on it, and if you can't do the rest and find us a campus, we're out of here. And so they boxed all their stuff up they were within sight of the old store, and they boxed everything up and said, we're ready to leave, and they hired a hack from Sevierville. So the story is, and I try not to tell too many stories, but the story is that the lady next door, the man that owned that owned the Mountain View Hotel, his wife, he had a boarding house because he had a sawmill out in Greenbrier. His wife sent him a note and said, I had a dream last night that a fog came down over our children and covered our children and the children in the community. Please come and save the children. And so he came from Greenbrier, where he was working, and gathered everyone at the old store, and they all agreed that the store owner, he owned about a 30-acre farm there, and there was a rental house there that the teachers lived in, and they rented it from him. And they all agreed that it was worth $2,000, and he said he'd take $1,800 for it, and they all agreed it was worth that. So, Mr. Huff of the Mountain View Hotel said, I'll give $250, and they knew that they already had $600. So Mr. Maples said, well, I'll give $250. Well, the store owner, Mr. Old, said, well, I'll give as much as anybody else. I'll give $250. So we have down at the courthouse, $50 this family, $25 this family, $10. They raised the money there in July to buy that. And so Charlie Ogle, who was the son of the owner of the grocery store, he was an old man when I was in the 50s, when I was growing up here. He shot off all the firecrackers left over from 4th of July. Well, they already had the architect, they had the money in the bank, they had the plans. So this is July. Well, by January they had finished a 5-room school building. We call this the White School Buildings. This was the elementary school. So this was the first 5 classes. And that's, it had 3 rooms in the back, and 2 on the side, and the center was for a library and what you could call an auditorium. And that's the one in the right hand. If you're looking at the school, it would be the back right hand corner. That was my 3rd grade room. So that's where I went to school, and that's what that, but it was a lot different then. This is a lot earlier picture. Well, the teachers, they had 5 teachers, so they were all, a couple with children were living in the rental cottage. So the teachers had to sleep in the school building, and they cooked their meals together at the little rental house. So desperately, the next thing they needed was a teacher's cottage. So they had the money and the plans already for that. Somehow they were really organized. So by January of 1915, they had completed that. Well, the concept of settlement school was different from a mission school and different from even like a folk school. Actually, it was started in Chicago, the Hull House. And the idea was the people they were helping was the immigrants that came in. And so they helped them learn the culture here, at the same time preserve their cultures, and helped them economically. So that was very important. So the economics to help them. So Aunt Lizzie Reagan was hired to watch the children of the couple that were teachers, and of course she ended up running the whole place. And she got Aunt Lydia's loom out. Aunt Lydia was a basket maker. She's a very famous basket maker. And they sold over 5,000 baskets of hers, and she was in her 80s when the Pi Phis came here. So the two of them, Lydia and Aunt Lizzie, got the barn looms out. They discovered that everyone had an old loom stored in the barn. Up until the Civil War, you had to make your own, most of you, as much as you could. You couldn't order silks from anyone. And so they did a lot of their own weaving and for their needs. And but then after the Civil War, manufactured cloth was available, calico and all of that, gingham and all that was available at reasonably priced. So they just took the looms down and put them in the barn. But a few women like Aunt Lizzie and Aunt Lydia still continued to weave the coverlets, and that's a cover lid is what it became a coverlet. It was covered the bed. It was a bed cover. It was a bedspread, and that's what's here on the. And in the case, there's a yellow one. Both of these were made by Laura Porter, and she and her sister started Johnson's Tourist Court owned baskets, and Max Johnson, Laura was his great aunt. And she did that weaving, that one and the one there. So by 1925, they had added a health center, the one on the left here, that's the health center. After they hired a nurse for the community, not just the school, community nurse, after the pandemic of 1919. And the teachers went into the homes in the community and nursed the people, and that's when they really, really became friends. They were not, and they didn't come here for charity. They came here to help lift the people up, but they modeled everything. They didn't say, you need to do this, you need to do that. They just sort of showed you how. When they built the teacher's cottage, the people here knew how to use mortar. You know, all their foundations were stones, river stones and everything in mortar, but they'd never seen rebar. So when they poured the basement for the teacher's cottage, a man came and talked to him and says, my wife told me I better come and talk to you. That stuff you put in there is not going to hold the house up. And of course he was surprised the next day. So all they did, they modeled, central heat. They modeled a generator. They just showed the people how to do it. And the ladies said, well, we're going to have a tool day. We're going to show you all these new tools that's available. And so they were so excited. They were the most exciting thing that happened here. Even in the 1930s, they'd say, wonder what them women are doing now. So by 1925, this log cabin in the middle was the one that's supposed to be the original house. Actually, it was the second one that Martha Jane had. The first one burned. But the red barn was built, and that's the barn there, and it's still there. It's a dormitory now. It was a real barn. They got a grant. They knew all about grants. They got a Smith-Hughes Act. They got some money from the government for agricultural teacher and probably enough to build a barn. So they built a 3-story barn, and the animals were in the bottom. But the 2-story loft, that's where they had played their basketball games. That was a basketball court. And when it wasn't that, they one of the alumni clubs, who was very supportive individually besides the sorority, national sorority, had bought them a 16mm projector. So my mother, who was born in 1919, when she was 5 years old, the first movie film she saw was sitting on a hay bale in the loft of the red barn. So anyway, also in 1925, they hired Winna Jean Redding, and she was the nurse graduated from Columbia University and had a master's degree from another big university when they hired a nurse. So everybody they hired, they were very qualified. She graduated from a craft school in Massachusetts. She was from Canada, actually. And she came in, she wanted to know what her job description was. And the director said, well, you just got to get out there and find your job and do it. So she went out on horseback. Well, she found out, number one, they all had looms. They had already been teaching the students weaving. Aunt Lydia and Aunt Lizzie was teaching the students weaving. They'd got the barn looms out, some of them. So since they already had looms, and of course she ordered some looms from Canada, and the local woodworkers immediately copied those looms. So they're building smaller looms. Those were pretty big. You couldn't put them in your house. The Walker sisters had theirs on the front porch. They only wove in the summer when it's on the porch. So, so she went out on horseback. The roads were so bad. You saw the road. She would go on horseback out to the homes and taught the women to weave in their own homes. And she went out and had some weavers and of course, Gatlinburg, it was, like I said, it was a barter economy. But in the 1920s, they knew the park was coming. And so the state was building a road over to North Carolina to make it more chance the park would come, the national park would come. So there were the engineers, and they were all in town. And already tourists were coming to Gatlinburg in the 1920s. But this sort of gave a base to the people that they started out selling baskets before they even started the weaving program, and the people didn't understand consignment, so they had to buy the products from them and then resell them through their alumni clubs. And they had alumni clubs everywhere. They'd have these big Christmas sales. So as soon as they saw somebody was getting a cash money, especially women getting cash money, and so about in two years, in 1927, after she'd been here 2 years, the Winna Jean Redding wrote her report to the Pi Beta Phi board of directors. She said, I've got 41 women weaving in their homes for me, and she said that don't count the ones that are weaving for the other 3 stores that's already opened in town. She said, and so there was some like Ely's Mill in places, and we'll tell you about Ely's Mill because some of the examples here, that was another weaving center, and very quickly the store owner's wife, Hattie Ogle, opened a craft shop and had weavers coming to her shop, and then my mother's cousin, her uncle had a E.L. Reagan furniture shop. He started that in 1910 and had his own electric system to power his shop. She started one where the old Ruby Tuesdays was. So there was already 3 shops, or more than 3 there in 1927. So this Gatlinburg was sort of growing up quickly, even then. So this is someone weaving in their home, and this is the log cabin you can see. This is Cora Morton, and she lived on way up on Cold Mountain. And the story is that she had a baby in her arms and was carrying the weaving in. Because they had to bring their weaving in and they'd get paid for it. They would on paper loan them the yarn, and then when they came back they would pay them by the piece, which was a little icky because of some of the child labor laws that were enacted at that time. But they had accountants, they handled it. And then one lady, not this lady, but one lady who also was, Zora Kenner, lived up Baskins, and she crossed Baskins Creek about 13 times, bringing her yarn, taking the yarn home and bringing the finished product back. And they had to bring the finished product back. It had to be finished, hemmed, or the fringe tied and pressed, and come back perfectly. And they all, the replacements, they had to be all exactly the same size. So that was just amazing. And this is Cora again with her daughter, and there were 4 generations. Then that's her daughter, and I forget her first name. She worked for us. And I moved back. I'll stop and finish telling my story. I moved back here when I was 40. I moved away when I was 14 and I lived in Florida, and then I moved to Atlanta. And by the time my children was grown, my mother came down with my grandmother's loom that had been stored in the attic for 50 years. And when I was in everywhere when I was working for the Pi Phis. I was in all the rooms. I had to wash dishes for breakfast and lunch and dinner, so there wasn't any point in going home, so I just hung out with the crafts classes. And the last thing I was interested in was the weaving. That didn't look like fun at all. But the pottery and some of the other stuff looked good. I did so. But when I came back, I moved to Atlanta. My mother brought the loom that's been stored in my grandmother's attic that my grandfather built. And so I thought, well, we couldn't even put it together. So I knew about Arrowmont. I grew up there. You know, so I thought, well, I came and stayed with her for 2 weeks and took a weaving class. And went back home and refinished the loom. The loom wasn't finished. It was a tool, so they didn't finish their looms. So I refinished it and put a good finish on it and put a warp on it. And I thought, well, it'll be like macrame. I'll weave a few placemats and that'll be the end of it. I wove some placemats, and the selvage was so bad I had to But I made a couple of wall hangings, and then my husband died, and I moved back here when I was 40, and when I was 41, not long after that. And so I brought those 2 wall hangings, and I put them in an aircraft shop on consignment. And in 1983, they hired me as an apprentice weaver to the master weaver for the cottage weaving industry that had been going on since 1925. So that's how, and so that apprenticeship was one of the instructors that would come and teach class. Oh, I was paid to take classes.
Oh, hardship.
I mean, I thought I died and gone to heaven, I'll tell you. Because I was, surprisingly enough, I was pretty passionate about weaving. So when they hired me as that, I thought, you're paying me to do this? And you're paying me to take classes in weaving? Okay, I'll do it. I'll take it. So that's my story. I'll finish that part. So one of the instructors that I had at Arrowmont said that was the equivalent of a fine arts degree in weaving because there's no other cottage weaving industry in the country. Back to this. Winnie so she started a weaving guild immediately started a weaving guild because so the women would all come in and bring their work in when she paid them. So they would all bring everything in. So she decided to have a weaving guild. So she started the weaving guild where the women got together and decided, well, we need to do some things here. So they started a garden club. They got the state to plant the dogwood trees. And they decided they needed to raise money, so one of them wrote a play. And they started to raise money because they didn't have any insurance. So they raised money so they'd have a fund they could borrow for eyeglasses and doctors. And one young woman had her baby paid for before it was born using her weaving money.
Okay.
And Lucinda, I think it was Lucinda, Ogle said that when she started, as soon as she got married, she started weaving because her mother was a weaver, and that was her mother. And she said with her first paycheck, she bought a cook stove, a bedstead, enough to set up housekeeping with her first paycheck.
Wow.
So that was very interesting. But they started the garden club that became famous. People would come from as far away as Oak Ridge for the flower shows at the hotel. It's continued to grow. At one time there were like 200 women living in their homes. And like I said, they had it set up accountant-wise till it was okay to pay them the piece, and they soon had 3 and 4 generations weaving for them. Like I said, that Cora Morton, her daughter, and then her daughter's children are still weaving. At Ely's Mill, they used to have weaving from Hope Reagan and her sister. Both of them are the granddaughters of Cora Morton. So the generations are still going, and that's what Jess and I, the reason we're doing this, we applied for, 10 years ago, me and a girl, one of my students, weaving students, applied for a grant from the Arts Council of the state of Tennessee for a master weaver and an apprentice, and we didn't get the grant. And I didn't know about it till later. About a year ago, we found out that we would have got, thanks to Matilda, she found out from the Folkmont people that we would have got the grant, but they ran out of money. Mm-hmm. And they said, "Oh, get them to apply again. We've got money now."
They literally called you the one that got away.
So we applied for a grant. We have a grant, and that's why we're doing this. One of the reasons is that part of the grant is you have to share what you're doing. So that's why we wanted to do this program. So that's the high school that was built in 1928. My grandfather did the stonework on it, and he got paid $2,000 in 1929 when it was finished. And my grandmother thought she was smarter than him, and she put her money in a different bank. And she lost hers, but he didn't. So they had plenty of money during the whole 1930s, during the Depression. And most of the people in Gatlinburg it was so funny, the economy here was booming in the 30s. And they formed the guild, the aircraft shop formed Southern Highlands Incorporated with TVA. They had a lot of money in there for cultural things. TVA, the Southern Highlands Handicraft Guild, and aircraft shop formed Southern Highlands Incorporated, and they had shops in Rockefeller Plaza in New York, Palmer House in Chicago. I mean, they were selling their alumni clubs. I mean, it was just booming. Gatlinburg was, and the people all the parks people were here. Building the road people were here. The tourists were coming, and so during the Depression, Gatlinburg was booming. So, see what else I've got here. So aircraft, they built two shops. There was one in that they converted the old schoolhouse into an aircraft shop to start with, and then they built this shop in 1940, and it was there for a long time. And this is some of their stuff. So, and then this is on the right is Nella Hill. She was the master weaver that I was apprenticed from. And then granddaughter is on the left. Well, this is a commercial break. I was saving all my good pieces after I've been here about 40 years. When I was 80, I was going to have a retrospective show, see if Arrowmont would let me have a retrospective show of all the special pieces I'd saved, and of course the Gatlinburg fire took that. And so I said, well, I'll have a birthday party, and we did. My daughter and a friend Day at Arrowmont put together a big birthday party. And so I had done some commissions for the convention center when they built it in the early 80s. And the one on the bottom and this over here, I had done those, and they remodeled recently, and they were in the storeroom, and they didn't want them anymore. So they gave them back to me. And I thought, oh, I can still have a retrospective. So thanks to Heather, she's got me lined up for October the 24th till December the 20th, something like that. We've got the dates over here. I'm going to have my retrospective show after all in the gallery as you go in the Turner building at Arrowmont. So that's Jess then is going to tell you a little bit more about the
these lovely, beautiful wall hangings, and she had one in Berea that people had on display there because she's that fancy of an artist. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to Berea, I want to be part of their weaving program. So when I made my little Berea College resume, I made it sound like I had a lot less food service experience than I did and a lot more weaving experience. Fudge those lines a little bit. But then when I was interviewing, they were like, okay, so tell me, where did you learn to weave? And I was like, oh, I learned in my grandmother's basement. And they were like, ooh, we like this one. I was like, I got the story, I got the Appalachian connection. So I wanted to have a picture of, here's the first year I was working at Berea. We were in one of these little cabins, like these pictures that she's had, in a little room. This building was built in the 1920s. It was full of looms. This picture in the bottom corner, you can see it's got pink and white thread on it, and I have an example of a blanket made in the same pattern. I was working on one of those looms. They were very, as I was doing this, I'm picturing myself looking like these ladies in these postcards with their old style weaving. And at the time that I was there, we were in this little cottage, and the tourists would come through and they'd see us, and we'd all have taken our shoes off because it's easier to weave that way. And it's mid-2010s, and they're like, oh, these still Appalachian kids, they still don't have any shoes. But it did make me want to spend more money on and I mean, when I was a student making these Berea College products, I got a student discount, but the blanket I have, I still had to save up and buy myself, even though I was the one that made it. I was like, we're gonna do it. And it was $80, and I got a discount, and it ended up being like $60. But when I was a broke college kid, that felt like a lot more money. They paid me per hour, but I was making something like $5 an hour, so that was a lot of hours to get a blanket that I took less time than that to make. And Grandma was talking about how the program here made you have everything hemmed and pressed and finished nicely. And when I worked at Berea, I didn't have to worry about that. That was somebody else's job. I just was on the loom doing my little thing. And the people who did have to do the finishing project were always like, well, we can tell when Jess has been weaving because there's pink hairs in all of the project. But I mean, that program paid for my college education. It meant I didn't have to go into debt. And it made me feel connected to Appalachia. I didn't even necessarily have a conception of what that really meant until I lived somewhere besides Gatlinburg. And I'm sitting there making these products that people want to buy that's helping pay for my college. And I'm like, oh, my family's been doing this. This is how we've survived for all these generations back to first settlers starting Gatlinburg. I'm like, people don't always know what their great-grandparents were doing, but I'm like, I can picture all the great women in my family sitting at a loom, making something, selling it, and that helped us survive and get by. And, you know, like you were saying, Grandma, it was barter economy, but the women were the ones bringing in actual cash, and so I feel like that maybe let us be able to be a little bit more mouthy and opinionated than at other time periods. When we were saying they weren't allowed to be other professions, but the fact that we were bringing in money, you have to listen to what I say a little bit more if I'm the one adding cash to the home. And so it just made me feel honored to be part of that tradition and keeping it alive. Not just in terms of the fact that like we're making these really pretty things, but also that it's, you know, it has this like cultural trend. I can look back and we have stuff here that Grandma's mom, my great grandmother made, and we can see the connection of like we were making similar things. And also, I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but every single thread in the hand woven products has been touched by a human at some point. It's not a factory. And I think that metaphorically has an energy in it. And so these pieces that we have that we know her mother is no longer alive, but we can touch something that she made, we can see it. You know, she touched every single thread in that piece, and that's a way that we can still feel part of her life carrying on. And a lot of the stuff we have from her burned up in the fire too, but we have a few pieces, and now I've made other pieces influenced by stuff she made, so that will be a way for it to carry on. I don't know, it just makes me happy. And then I also just wanted to show, these are some of the examples. This picture is from the Great Smoky Mountains National Park archives of these different weaving patterns. When I was at Berea, we didn't do anything this complicated. We had some stuff, but we were more focused on the production aspect. So one of the things that was nice about us getting this grant is it kind of forced me to learn the things that I didn't have to learn before. When I was at Berea, the loom had already been set up. I just had to get in there and do each, you know, there were parts of the process that I never had to do. And so this grant kind of helped Grandma and I be able to learn those pieces so I could make these things start to finish in a way that once I graduated from Berea, I didn't have access to their weaving studio anymore. And so we're sort of planning what my first loom projects would be, and we started off with a pattern that is a traditional pattern, and it's also a little bit more simple than some of those more extravagant patterns. And again, it's one that we have a piece from my great-grandmother. So it's the first step I wanted to start off with was one that has a family connection. And just to sort of walk through how you read this pattern, this top row tells you every single thread has to be in the right order to match. So if it's on the third line, you need a thread in this third one here. If it's on the fourth one, you need a different thread in that. And if you mess up and you switch any one up at any point, you can throw the whole thing off and not look right. So it's very precise, and it took a lot of time. So Grandma doesn't always do this kind of weaving anymore, and a lot of times it takes a lot of work to get the loom set up. Once you have it in that pattern, you're going to do a lot of things in it. And I'd never done this before. So she helped me set up the loom, and then I designed this piece here. And so the pattern is in this pattern, but I still picked what color order and sort of how to space it out. I'm going to pass this one around while we keep talking.
I've already said.
Oh yeah, I was like, I handed it to you all. You already did. You helped me get it. Maybe. And I also entered a piece in the same design at Arrowmont in the biennial recently, and at the most recent one, Grandma and I both got pieces in, so we're doing something right. I've never entered anything in an art show before, so it felt very special that my first piece made with grant money did get accepted. But then I kind of feel like I ended up setting the bar too high for myself, and I'm like, oh, if it doesn't get in a show, why did I make this? So I'm still working on that. But I also just sort of wanted to demonstrate weaving a little bit, and I know we ended up with a lot of people here, so if you can't see, you can come on up, or I'll keep doing it throughout. But just to...
You can get up and walk around.
Yeah.
So come on up and we'll see what she's doing.
Raise different threads. So if I do this one here, if you've ever had like a pot holder loom or done any kind of basic weaving, you take the needle yourself and do every other thread, but the loom makes it so you don't have to do that. So if I press this pedal, it does every other thread one way, and if I press the next one, it does the opposite. And that's just basic plain weave fabric, but we also had to set up the loom to do this pattern, and so one shaft does, you can see the pattern goes one way, and then there's a different, like there's one checker and then there's the one to the left of it. So the first one is this way and the second one's this way. So it really, you know, when looms were first invented, it helps streamline the process more. If I was having to go by hand and pick every single one, that's more room for error. It's going to take a lot longer. It's going to be less fun. And again, more room to mess up. So one of the things that's nice about these geometric patterns is once you have the loom set up, you know this row is going to be right once you get it right, which it takes a little bit of time to do that. Once this row is right, then you can just put the thread in and move on. And it does help you get it faster than before looms were invented. Yeah, and so once I have this open, this is called a shed, and you just pass the thread through. And this style of weaving that I do is called overshot, and I have more colors going, so I'm like, oh, that's more, again, more room you can make mistakes, but also it makes it look more interesting. Nope, see, I'm talking and I did the wrong thing.
Yeah, that happens.
So when you pull it down, you can see it immediately that you made a mistake?
I can. But it looks like the wrong checker on this. It looks like it had been staggered wrong. Instead of being in a row, like in a stripe with that color.
Perfect weave.
Well, and some of that, I mean, you know, everyone probably has a different, if we sat other weavers up here, they would do it slightly different than me. And so, yeah, I need to know where I'm at in my pattern on this thing and make sure I hit the right treadle is the proper term, and then the right color. So right now I just wanted to make sure I have this dark green to do this row, and then now I'm going to switch to the next color. And for me, one of the things that I did is if I'm hitting this one, it's going to be like, I'm not explaining that well. This one matches the side that I'm on, so I know every other one is correct. But again, I've gotten into a pattern of it, so I needed to make sure. So right now I did something that on here would have been written as treadle 1. I did one row of treadle 1 in my background color. And again, I made up this pattern, so I'm following the design that what goes next is the one I thought is the right one. I'm also trying to pull the same amount each time to make the stitches even. I'm making sure here, this is the beater bar, I pull it in and it helps this thread cinch in. Hopefully I'm keeping it consistent between each one. At this point in my life, I kind of hope for the best. You can measure and make sure you're getting the proper ends per inch, and that it's all fitting a certain one, but I can sort of tell by eyeballing how close they are as well. But yeah, right now I'm doing an individual thread. Each row is going every other thread from the row before it.
You have the pattern do you have that piece of paper you were using for a pattern?
Maria, and it kind of matches that picture of what was on the loom.
Was that Arrowmont?
Yeah. But it was also, this is the only thing on the table that wasn't made in Gatlinburg to my knowledge. Everything else here was made, everything else was made in Gatlinburg by a local weaver.
And my collection burned, but Ruth Welburn at Ely's Mill, I had coveted some of her collection, and she wouldn't give any of them to me. But after the fire, she brought me a whole basket. And that's my collection now. The only thing is the brown and white. I was telling Nella, the master weaver, that I really didn't like overshot weaving. I said, once you get that pattern locked in, you just got to sit and do the same thing over and over again. And she just grinned. And so we put that warp on the loom in our office. We had 2 desks and 2 looms in our office.
Probably
and she said, okay, have at it. So I did a sampler, and never ran out of different patterns I could do. And so at the end of it, she said, you might want to do a wall hanging, so.
Well, that concludes our program. Thank you, Francis, for coming. I really appreciate it. And Jess, you can see over there. This is the Our Story Series program, part of Anna Porter Public Library. This is our second one from our second year. We are grateful for you all joining us, and we hope you continue to see our programs. Take care.
What's coming next?
Coming next? Take care.
What's coming next?
Coming next? Yes, Lou Bolton. He's actually the one filming right now. He's
Next?
Yes, you're next.
In September?
Yep, September 16th.
You know who this is, right?
Yes, that's why I didn't know her name, but.
Rebecca Ann Oakley.
Yeah,
And she was a weaver.
yes.
Had a shop called the Wiley Shop down
The
in,
Wiley shop, yeah.
coming into
She
that.
did the work and he did the talking.
I think you're right. Well, I'm gonna do the talking when we have a program on
Okay, I'm
Wiley
gonna
in
talk